Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us at the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce for Resource Champions, Canada's role in the brave new world. We certainly are facing an extraordinary environment these days globally, and as a resource-rich country and the demands increasing in many of our commodity markets, I think this is an excellent and opportune time for such a great and diverse conversation. I want to thank our sponsor, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and we want to recognize that the work that they do in the upstream oil and natural gas industry, but also in bringing together the variety of resource-based economies in Canada for a fantastic conversation here today, and a few more conversations to come with the support of CAP that has been instrumental in allowing us to do what we're doing here to highlight where economic prosperity can really benefit Canada in terms of sharing its wealth across Canada and sharing its abilities to achieve, if you like, even economic reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples. On that, I would like to then just open today's event with a land acknowledgement, but also recognizing yesterday as National Indigenous Day. And I think it's appropriate that we acknowledge that while we are meeting in cyberspace, we are here in Sault Ste. Marie, are on the lands of the Ojibwe Nation, and Métis, and the Garden River and Batchewana First Nations. And we want to recognize the deep historic appreciation and connection to this place that our Indigenous populations and Métis have here, and thank them for protecting the natural environment of their homelands, of which they have occupied in memoriam. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And we wish to honor the original peoples of Turtle Island as we recognize their homelands in the spirit of partnership and reconciliation. So just before we get started here, I wanted to just take a moment to introduce our moderator for today's session, and she will then in turn introduce our esteemed panel. And Ginny Roth is a moderator today, and she comes to us as a vice president and national practice lead and government relations individual at Crestview Strategy. She is a sought after political commentator. Ginny advises multinational corporations, Canadian companies, and not-for-profits on government relations in Canada. Prior to joining the Crestview team, Ginny worked at Queen's Park as a party organizer for the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario and has been a lifelong political activist. Ginny brings her experience as a former staff in political campaigns and managing a team of professionals serving clients in every jurisdiction. And currently at Crestview, Ginny leads the national government relations practice, serving as the agency of record for many of the largest food and beverage, consumer packaged goods, pharmaceuticals, and extractive industry companies in the world. Ginny, thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate the time you're going to spend with us today, and we'll hand the proceedings over to you.
Thanks, Rory. Yes, extractive industries is part of that long list of industries for a reason. Government and politics plays a massive outsized role in our natural resources industries, in some cases for good reason, in some cases not for such good reasons. And I imagine we'll get into a lot of that today. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'm going to introduce our panelists quickly, and then I'm going to throw it to each one of them individually to kind of set the table and give us their, a bit of insight into the perspective they're bringing to the conversation. We'll then open it up to some questions. I've got some questions. I'm hoping we have a really good conversation that stems from them, but I'm also really eager to get your questions. So the chat function on Zoom is open to you right now. You may already have a question, in which case drop it in. A question may come to you as the conversation begins. just share your questions in the chat function, and I will do my best as the moderator to queue them up. I'm really hopeful that you all, as participants, will have some questions that you want our panelists to get into today. So I'll remind you of that periodically as we move through. So we're joined today by David McHattie, the Vice President of Institutional Relations at Tenaris, and he can get into, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to explain a bit about their business. Steve Flewelling, the Chief Development Officer at Noront Resources, Rory Johnston, Commodity Context, and Scott Volk, Technology and Innovation Lead at Tourmaline Oil Corp. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to ask you each one by one, as I said, to kind of present your opening perspective, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Dave, why don't we start with you? Tell us a bit about where you're coming from, and I think you have a short presentation to share as well.
Thank you. Good morning. As Ginny mentioned, I'm Vice President of Institutional Relations for Tenaris in Canada, but also I'm past chair of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters National Board, and I'm a Vice Chair of the Petroleum Services Association of Canada. Tenaris is one of the leading companies in both the steel and the energy services sectors. We manufacture steel pipes that are used in the oil and gas industry. And among our 23,000 employees, we have about 800 in Canada. What is it that when we talk about resource champions and the importance of this sector, what is it that Tenaris is manufacturing that contributes to this? We're making the steel casing and tubing that is used for the oil and gas wells. We are producing the line pipe that transports the hydrocarbons from the well to processing facilities, and then the standard pipe that's used in processing facilities. So we are participating along that manufacturing supply chain serving Canada's energy sector. We've just embarked on a $150 million investment to transform our operations, our manufacturing operations in Sault Ste. Marie in the middle of the pandemic. This was a decision we made, and we're nearly complete this investment. Why is it that we are investing $150 million in our manufacturing to serve a sector that is developing Canada's oil and natural gas? And in short, if I present my thesis, it's that in an increasingly regional world with supply chain and geopolitical challenges, the world wants Canadian energy. Half of the world's supply of energy is coming from what is considered by Freedom House not free countries. And there's an opportunity for Canada to contribute its resource wealth for a better world, and a better world that is demanding more energy. And so if I explain a little bit, the world really is demanding more energy. And so if we're thinking about demand for oil, demand for natural gas, the world is demanding a diverse supply of energy. And as we can see from the International Energy Agency's stated policy scenario, both demand for oil and natural gas are growing. Then, okay, there is a demand in the world, but why is it that Canada is an oil and gas leader today and for the foreseeable future? And just a couple of numbers quickly: our oil reserves rank as the third largest in the world. Our natural gas production is the fourth in the world. This makes us the fourth largest energy tubulars market in the world, and those are the steel pipes that we're manufacturing in Canada that Tenaris is a world expert in. The oil and gas extraction contributes significantly to Canada's nominal GDP, and since 2000, about $700 billion gross revenues have gone to government. So it's a sector that is contributing also to Canada's economy. Canada is a beacon for sustainable oil and gas for the world's growing energy needs. It's a consistent global leader in ESG rankings. Democracy, diversity, equity, rule of law, safety, environment, financial stability, a price on carbon, net zero ambitions through investment are all stated aspects of Canada's sector. And in reality, half of the world's oil and gas is coming from, as Freedom House has rated, not free countries. 49% of the world's oil, which is up from 38% in 2000, and 49% of the world's natural gas, which is up from 19% in 2000. So the trend is for less free countries. And in this, Canada is a beacon. And so if I conclude a little bit on what that means as an opportunity for us in this complex supply chain and geopolitical world, Canada has the opportunity to be exporting natural gas, for example, to Asia to replace higher intensity electricity generation, and natural gas to Europe. So it can provide tangible geopolitical impacts for the better. And if we are to be developing our energy to its potential, and a wealth of energy generally means an opportunity for domestic manufacturing. Domestic manufacturing, and I'll use the example of steel, where it's everywhere in energy development, and 30% of the steel consumed in Canada is in the energy sector. And if we choose Canadian steel, we are choosing a steel that is some of the lowest emissions, GHG emission steel in the world. And much of this comes from manufacturers in Ontario. And so in conclusion, in an aggressive Russia, China, Saudi geopolitical environment, do we as Canadians better understand today why energy security is so vitally important to other countries and a component of democracy, human rights, rule of law, and economic growth. Countries who share our values are aligning to diversify their energy supplies, especially from Canada, countries like Canada, who are investing in reducing its GHG intensity and have concrete actions to achieve net zero. I'll pass it back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Dave. Steve Flewelling, can you take us through the perspective you're bringing today and some top line thoughts before we get into our conversation?
Yes, gladly. Yes, so just for information, I don't know who's aware, but Noront Resources, which is a Canadian junior mining company, is now 100% owned by Wyloo Metals from Australia. So we were purchased in a process that lasted over a year. So we're now a private company as part of the Wyloo team, and Wyloo is the and I think this is important when I get into my thesis, is 100% owned by the Andrew Forrest, who is the executive chairman and largest shareholder of Fortescue Iron in Australia. So he's Australia's richest man. So he's our new owner. But more importantly than that, he's also a world leader in the transition and all the elements through his foundation and through Fortescue to focus on what's required in the world for the new green economy. So, for example, he wants to be the world's leader in the production of green hydrogen, as an example. So, very motivated. So, consequently, he saw the opportunity that we have in Canada and that now Wyloo Canada has to be a leader in the establishment of a critical mineral supply chain here in Ontario and in Canada. So what does that critical minerals mean? It means that there'll be a major expansion, depending on the commodity, whether it's lithium, nickel, cobalt, or others, in the decarbonization and electrification of our new green economy. There's going to be an enormous growth requirement for those commodities. And if you overlay that with, as was just mentioned, the geopolitical environment to have more responsible supply chains, I think we in Canada have an enormous opportunity to revitalize our resource sector and take advantage of that opportunity. The opportunity we have is that we know how to build projects in a responsible way. So if you look at any new mining project or resource project, the amount of investor pressure to deal with that in a responsible way from in all the elements of the new ESG focus that's on the resource industry, we have an enormous. That's underpinned by a great advantage in Ontario that we produce the majority of our power from green sources. That's all the good stuff. The challenge is that our regulatory environment, particularly around environmental permitting, is astonishingly slow and complex. And it's complex in two ways. One is that I think as Canadians, we're uncertain whether we want to be resource producers in the future. And that comes through in difficulties in the permitting process. It's overly, those complexities are magnified by, the very necessary but complex reconciliation we have with First Nations. So while that's all required, it's the unintended consequence of that is it's very, very slow. So run the risk that we miss the window to establish these resources and establish new markets because we can't manage those issues. The other, I think, big challenge, and it was mentioned by the previous speaker, is that we don't have enough hydroelectricity to meet all the needs. So I think a very aggressive strategy by Ontario has to be implemented to meet the power requirements of all the different opportunities that we have. And I don't believe currently we're on a course to get that done on a timely basis. So I think that's another big challenge for us. So great opportunities, great challenges. How do we manage them? I think that's my thesis.
Thanks, Steve. That's the big question. I'm sure we'll get into it. Rory, can I throw it to you? What perspective are you bringing today?
Yeah, hi, and thanks for having me. My name is Rory Johnston. I'm the founder of Commodity Context, which is a research platform currently hosted on Substack. I'm also an investor at Price Street, which is a family office in Toronto, and previously I headed commodity economics research at Scotiabank. So my focus is kind of broad commodity markets, but my specialty is specifically in oil and gas markets and North American kind of interlinkages there. So the kind of backdrop I'm hoping to give for everyone here, and I think kind of, coming off of some of the comments from both Dave and Stephen as well, obviously we find ourselves in an extraordinarily volatile moment globally. Markets are completely wild. Oil prices today, as an example, are collapsing again. We're down almost $20 a barrel over the past, week and a half. This is not normal levels of volatility. We are in, heightened, almost Knightian uncertainty territory. And that has a lot of, it's caused by a lot of this, trends we've been discussing of chronic underinvestment, chronic under prioritization on capacity building in these areas. And that's not going to give up anytime soon, mostly because we've, since we were hit by the COVID pandemic, and you really got this shot in the arm of industry to finally say, okay, we're prioritizing cash flows and profitable barrels or molecules or what have you over volume growth. Well, that is great for the industry. Unfortunately, it's not fantastic for the rest of the global economy that requires this energy to kind of, power everything that's going on. So the question is going to be, one, and I think as Stephen correctly said, do we as Canadians want this mantle, this kind of responsibility of being resource providers to the world? Obviously, we have the resources. We have massive, unfathomably large resources of pretty much every mineral imaginable. The question is, do we have the willpower to push through the economic uncertainty? Are these things going to break even? Are these going to be, the big talking points now are around stranded assets and whether or not these are going to work out in the long run? And unfortunately, in an energy transition like we're currently embarking upon, the risk of stranded assets is unfortunately a risk we are going to have to manage, because the risk of under-supplying infrastructure, under-supplying these resources is exactly what we're seeing right now. So wouldn't it be great if we had a 10% money losing massive, supply of natural gas production in Europe that would have made no economic sense forever, and all of a sudden is making absolutely windfall profits? These are the types of resources, these are the types of kind of backstops we need. And unfortunately, the private sector increasingly is not always able to, have that risk on their shoulders alone. So whether or not that's going to mean additional government support, or in the case of something like the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline system, outright, nationalization of a project in order to get it across the finish line and through these kind of gatekeeping and kind of roadblocks, it's going to be difficult to build projects like this without that kind of government partnership going forward. And I think the politics then play an even, we always hear about how Canada is free energy, Canada is free resources. That is obviously an unambiguously good thing from a value proposition, but it's usually actually not a great thing from a perspective of actually pushing those projects through, because you have so many points of potential road stops and kind of people coming in and intervening to stop the project. This morning, I think, is a great example. We have stories out, and we were saying this a little bit before, how the Parliamentary Budget Officer is now announcing that the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline, because of the cost overruns, is not going to break even on a project level basis and is going to be unprofitable. But I think from a government perspective, this is critical infrastructure. And from an economic perspective, Trans Mountain is still obviously going to break even, because as we saw back in 2018, when you have these kind of pipeline or egress bottlenecks and shortfalls, you have the differential for WCS blow to $50 a barrel, and you have tens of billions of dollars of economic loss. 1 month of that is very easily able to kind of paper over some of the losses that you see on a project level like this. So I think it's that kind of moment. I think industry is not always used to thinking about how to effectively partner with government like this. And I think that's the kind of environment we need to see. We need to see, a government that's willing to, take the hand of industry and say, how do we do this together? How do we de-risk these projects? How do we do this properly? And then industry also needs to be, play ball and say, okay, look, we're going to put up some risk here because we also believe in the kind of future efficacy of this. And I think investors finally also need to be willing to let that happen. Otherwise, you see pushback, you see obviously this massive rising of pressure for windfall energy company taxes, et cetera. We need to do this in a proper, fluid and stable way. Otherwise, we're going to get a very disorderly transition, and that's not in anyone's interest, government, citizen, or corporate. So hopefully we can figure that out today.
Sounds like an easy feat. Scott, can you bring us your perspective? What kind of biases and thinking are you bringing to today's conversation?
Sure, great. Thank you very much for having me. So my name is Scott Volk. I'm the Technology and Innovation Lead at Tourmaline Oil. I'll give a little bit of background on Tourmaline just because we're not necessarily a household name, and our name might be a little bit misleading. So we're Tourmaline Oil, but we're Canada's largest natural gas producer. We're 80% natural gas, about 20% liquids and some oil in there. We develop resources, and we're also a very large midstream company. So our philosophy is to not only be a producer, but also a midstream company. So we own a large amount of midstream assets. So we operate in both Alberta and BC, and we're quite proud of the fact that we're very clean and the largest producer in Canada. Our focus on being a clean producer is on doing real things that are making real differences today. So we're not focused on huge talk about the future. We're focused on we're here now and we're working today. So let's do the real things today. So examples of the things we're doing, we're really focused in methane. So we've hit our methane reduction target 3 years early. That's 212,000 tons of CO2e that we've eliminated. And we've done that through like a variety of things. We now operate an emissions testing center that's part of the Natural Gas Innovation Fund. We've done that with a number of different devices. We're working with anything from satellites to fixed wing aircraft to continuous monitors that can detect down to the parts per billion. We're extremely advanced in that phase. We're also very focused on diesel displacement. We think it's just obvious that we run our own natural gas instead of diesel fuel, get the trucks off the road, run a lower carbon fuel. To date, we've displaced over 65 million liters of diesel fuel with our own natural gas, reducing emissions with it. We're a huge water recycling company. We're at the point now in BC, for example, we're recycling up to 95% of our flowback water, which for us is incredible. Both from a environmental attribute and from a logistical challenge, it's much easier to have pipeline infrastructure and get trucks off the road and recycle water. And then I would say the last thing, as far as like showing like real progress and things that we're doing, we've got a ton of work into waste heat and energy efficiency. So we've got over 32 waste heat units. To put that into a weird unit, but a unit that people may be familiar with, that's over 42 megawatts of energy that we're kind of capturing and using that would have been wasted in the past. So it's a pretty significant number and pretty valuable to the industry. So to kind of bring that back all into the context, I think kind of what Dave was talking earlier, but is that Canada's got a really significant option. We have, especially when it comes to natural gas, we have the cleanest natural gas, or some of the cleanest natural gas in the world. We have the opportunity to supply a premium product that is much cleaner and that the world is asking for today, and we can likely ask for a premium price. At the same time as we can fill in some energy security needs. There's a lot of energy security issues around the world and still even in Canada. So we need more energy as a whole. We need all forms of energy. And I would propose that Canada is sitting in a very unique situation where we need to really decide, do we want to kind of take on that moral obligation and provide a cleaner, better product to a world that needs it? Or do we want someone else to fill that role and do it in a way that's a less environmentally friendly, less responsible, harder on the environment, and doesn't have nearly all the policies and protections that Canada has in the sector that we develop? And I would say that's across all resources. Like, I would propose we definitely have that obligation to the world for Canada to be an active part in resource development.
Thanks, Scott. So I'm struck by something, Scott, you just said, and Dave, you alluded to earlier, which is, there's this demand for Canadian resources, and it's not a nice thing to think about. It's just a fact, right? The way people live their lives around the world requires energy, and Canada is a massive holder of that energy. But that was true before Russia invaded Ukraine. It was true before COVID. And so, we should spend some time talking about recent changes, say over the last 2 or 3 years. But there are these intractable challenges that existed before some of these big global shifts. And as a political person, while I'm really taken with the moment, because I think there's a real political opportunity, because the public is now awake to these challenges and these realities in a way that I think they weren't before Russia invaded Ukraine. When we go to actually tackle the problems, they did exist before in many cases, or the realities anyway, about this global demand and our ability to meet it, but our inability seemingly to create a policy environment that enables it. And so to this question of a policy environment, I'm going to open the floor to anyone, and you can just chime in as you see fit. What is the status of our policy environment? Rory, you alluded to the economic challenges of financing projects. Let's get into that a little bit, but let's also get into, are projects even viable? Like given the regulatory path for new projects of all kinds at all levels of government, do we live in an environment where projects can get approved, where pipelines and new mine exploration, all of that can get approved? And if we don't, what needs to change so that they can be?
Maybe I'll jump in there just kind of to kick it off. I would propose that projects are viable. Tourmaline's doing well at being one of the cleanest natural gas producers in the world. I think where we're challenged is having that social license and a country that stands behind our resource sector to say that we are doing this better than anywhere else in the world, and we're filling a need that the world needs. So I would propose that there are some challenges on policy in that front. And then most of the policy concerns would be about having the infrastructure and having the projects in place that can allow us to be a global player and really help with global problems. So I'd say easy enough to do on our own soil, but we need some policy in place that actually makes projects happen. We need LNG projects. We need real pipeline projects. We need the ability to get our products to go help world problems. And I think it's also kind of understated as to how important natural gas and all energy sectors are for the security of Canadians. People kind of forget that we spend all summer putting almost a TCF of gas in the ground for storage, so it's available in the winter. Those types of things, we need that type of reliability. We will freeze to death if we don't have a way to have some form of energy that heats our homes. So that energy going in the ground and being there, that's more energy, just as an FYI, that's more energy than all of BC and Quebec's hydro. Like that is important for those cold days to have that energy storage. That battery is just incredible. So I think we need to kind of think a little bit about energy security, both across the globe and in Canada, and have policy that really is grounded in reality today, and kind of make sure that Canadians have that energy security and can take advantage of the fact that we do have incredible assets that we can be helping the world with, and building a policy framework to allow us to do that.
If I could jump in, I think one of the things that Scott is talking about is what are we doing today? What's happening today? And I think this is an opportunity for us to interact with Canadians better and more often, and so that they understand that our resources can be economic. They are economic. What is happening today? Well, today, the United States is our egress. We can't get an oil or a natural gas project constructed in Canada, and I suspect can be on the mining sector as well. Well, they are able to build them in the United States, and we connect with the United States, and our energy companies that are exploring and developing our energy are economic and they're profitable. And I think what we need to think about is communicating with Canadians that this energy diversification that is ongoing and will continue to be ongoing for decades has oil and natural gas important in it. And in order to transition to this more diverse matrix, we really need a strong and healthy oil and gas sector to help pay for the investments that the government is needing to make in hydrogen, in carbon capture and storage, in the electrification necessary for us to transition our autos from those that are powered by the internal combustion engine to those that are powered by batteries. And we can be a player. The government is investing in these projects to diversify. But what we have to remember as Canadians is the government is investing our money. And when I talk about our money, I'm talking about the contributions, not only as us as individual taxpayers, but those of our companies who employ us and invest in our industry. And so when I use a number like $701 billion that are going from the oil and gas sector to governments, this is the money that is being then recycled back into investing in technologies that are helping us diversify our fuel sources. But much more money is needed. Imagine if we didn't have that $701 billion. We would be in a tough shape. And so I think we need to remind Canadians so that then they can remind their elected officials that the answer is we need all and we need more, and the world needs all and more of Canada.
So I'm just going to pop in there. So I think there's an interesting question. I mean, I'm not a producer of energy. I just talk about it. I'm a data guy. I'm a chart guy. So the question is, I mean, one of the big trends we've seen across the entire world of energy right now is that even in areas like Texas, where you have extremely favorable government support, companies say, doesn't matter if it's $300 oil, we're not investing. You know, we're all the money's going to go back to shareholders. So I think there's an interesting question here that you have these two conflicting trends. You have government now, for the first time in 20 years, saying, we want more energy production. We want you to be producing more. And companies saying, look, we've lost money for a decade. We've lost our investors' money in many cases for a decade. It's time for people to get paid. So I think my question, I think, to some of the people that are more on the production side here are, what kind of policies would actually move the needle to make production more likely? Because I mean, all regulation at the end of the day is a function of two things in terms of producer's consideration. It's either going to make it longer in terms of a timeline, or it's going to make it more expensive to execute. So I think this question of, what actually moves the needle, because I think the challenge that we're facing here, and I was saying it in kind of my intro, is we're heading in two very opposite directions. And we're talking about, as everyone was saying, a massive, essential to life industry like energy is running dead against, in many ways, the government, which is the one we're going to need to kind of create the policy apparatus to make that former industry more successful than it currently is. So I think this question is, what is really going to move the needle? And I think, the example of pipelines, I think, is an interesting one. I've said previously that I think in many cases, particularly a cross international border pipeline, something like Keystone XL, may it rest in peace. No private company is going to risk investor capital on that kind of policy risk framework anymore. So for me, I basically see every major export egress essentially being either built by government and flipped back to industry eventually to manage and operate, basically once it's been de-risked, or some kind of, Ottawa was very much in favor of the Trans Mountain Pipeline when it was owned by Kinder Morgan, and was basically going to bat for them at every point, saying that, yes, this is cross-border infrastructure, it's constitutional, no, these opposition parties don't have standing, but there were so many potential points of, frustration that it didn't matter. Kinder Morgan basically said, we're done, we're going to abandon the project. And that's only when Ottawa stepped in to actually purchase the line. So beyond, nuclear option nationalizations, which I think many in the industry would generally frown upon, what kinds of interventions would legitimately be helpful now to get more energy, more Canadian energy specifically, into the market to fill those demand gaps?
If I can make a couple comments, obviously I'm not from the energy sector, but I think some of the challenges and the approach by government are similar. In my view, it gets back to a statement I made of what do Canadians want? Okay, do we want to take advantage of this opportunity to supply the world more responsibly with both minerals and energy? And I think we can demonstrate easily we can do that. But we must get some of the debate out of the system. Okay, so to me, and I mentioned it to the Premier a couple of weeks ago, just before the Ontario election. Do we need legislation like the War Measures Act? Okay, that said, and obviously it's not a war in a technical term, but it's special legislation that shows the government wants to get these important national level projects done and shift our environmental assessment process from the chronic, if we're going to do it mode, to how we're going to do it mode. And that's very different in my mind. And government, I believe, needs to demonstrate that they want to get things done. And right now that is not clear and not the case particularly at the bureaucratic level. So there has to be leadership from government that penetrates the bureaucracy and says, we want to get these things done. Figure out how, not our endless loops of if, maybe. Okay, that will not attract investors. It will, and I think we'll miss the opportunity in this country by sitting back a little bit too far and say, not prepared to intervene. And I don't think it's just investment intervention, it's leadership process intervention that has to happen.
It's kind of a chicken and egg, Stephen, because are governments today going to lead, or are they going to try and put together special interest groups in order to get elected? Or are Canadians going to insist on our governments to lead? And so who do we, obviously it'll be more efficient just to convince one person who was the prime minister or the premier, whatever it would be, but they don't act without the grassroots humans telling what they want. And so I don't know, do we have a hope of convincing Canadians and convince them what they want, as you asked the question?
Well, I think I'll just respond to, I think there's a big challenge. Like if you look at any recent election, and the recent election in Ontario as an example, there's no conversation at the election process about how we generate new revenue in Canada by any source. All it is a conversation about how we spend what we don't have. So we Canadians, we have to galvanize them, whether it's through associations or talk to government. I think there is an opportunity though, with people are seeing, particularly on the mineral side, that these minerals are required. It's all over the place. You can see it. It's not going to happen unless there's minerals. And then the challenge is going to be, there will be mineral development response, except it's going to be in China. Okay. And do we want that?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's, that's where Canadians are. We're at a point where we're either, in my view, over the next 5 years, we're either going to have a renewed mineral resource sector, or we're going to pass it, and we'll be continue to be rely on, mineral sources from challenging jurisdictions. That's a choice. So somehow that conversation has to get made. Or we'll miss the window. Once those supply chains are built for the new world, they're going to be built. So it's not 25 years, it's 5 to 10. So, and I think we have a glorious opportunity, whether we can get the conversation in the mind of the public and in the mind of government that this requires aggressive policy action. I think we're going to be in big trouble.
And it's a choice that we make. We buy overseas oil from challenging environments. We just don't talk about it.
In fact, Ginny, a number, we buy more imported oil, 238 billion, that in the last 10 years than we have bought from farm, fishing, and intermediate food products.
Yeah.
We are not aware of the facts as Canadians.
Yeah, so let's talk about that opportunity to get the facts out there a bit, because I think there are two things going on. There is this challenge, this renewed interest in global demand for our resources that I think you're right to allude, Steve, to the fact that the public seems to kind of have woken up to that a little bit. I mean, there's no escaping the news that is the direct consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's no, it'd be hard to follow the news today and not see that the EU is firing up coal plants like that. That's hard to escape for the public. And that creates, I think, an opportunity for people to capitalize on. There's another opportunity, which is, unfortunate opportunity, which is the CPI numbers in Canada came out today, and inflation is just, it's the worst it's been in 40 years. So for someone my age, not to boast, but for someone it's an entirely new experience. And that's, millennials are the biggest voting bloc in Canada, and they have not experienced a political environment informed by inflation. And it strikes me that one of the first impacts for the average member of the public is that they realize their purchasing power is gone. They can't afford food, they can't afford gas. And then they start to think about why that is. And I think they will be open to an explanation. And part of that explanation could be that we are not producing enough of what we should be producing. And that if we did, that would create the economic conditions where inflation wouldn't bite as much. And I wonder if there's an opportunity there. And I wonder how do we take advantage of that opportunity? We talked a bit about political leadership, but is there a chance for industry to start to inform the way the public views changing economic circumstances, low growth, high inflation, and God forbid we enter into a stagflation environment? Is there an opportunity politically and from a public policy perspective to reorient the public in the way that, frankly, Justin Trudeau has been very successful over the last decade at orienting the public towards transition, aggressive transition? Can they be reoriented towards, yes, transition, but our resources can be powerful in this moment?
I think the strongest pivot to that kind of allows us to do both is to say that we have a premium product. It displaces coal, it displaces natural gas from other places. It's meeting a need in the world. And our product has a premium product that serves an environmental agenda, as well as being first dollars for Canadians, creating that GDP, giving us the ability to battle inflation and some of the issues. We can't go spend second dollars in schools and hospitals and everywhere else if we don't make them in the first place. So we need that first revenue to be able to have taxes and to generate all the social services that we kind of need. So I think the highest road or the strongest pivot would be to say we can do both. And Canada has had regulations and systems in place that have made us a premium product for years and years and years. We need to promote ourselves as a premium product. We can actually do both of these things, and we're incredibly good at it. And to kind of go backwards to the previous question a little bit, like we want to grow our products. We want to grow our demands. Like Tourmaline, for example, we're very proud of the fact we're very good at drilling wells. We like drilling wells, but we need somewhere to put it. We need pipelines. We need somewhere to get it on a boat and get it to customers. And we need Canadians to support it, and we need our governments to support it. I think kind of what Stephen was saying about do Canadians need to get their head around the fact that this is something that we want and that we need? Yes, I think it is. And I think we can kind of take the high road on this one because we've got such an advantage. We've got such incredible resources that allow us to both be clean and very economic and make money for our country. So I would propose that's kind of the high road that allows the current government and other governments to kind of save face and also point in a direction that really meets the needs of Canadians and meets the needs of the world right now. So I think there is a unique situation where we can take advantage of both things. And the other weird thing is that people really want to pay for a premium product. So they want, like at Tourmaline, we've done certifications. We can certify the life cycle carbon intensity of our gas. It's extremely low. People are wanting to pay a premium for that product. Europe is looking for that opportunity. They don't want to switch to coal. They're kind of forced to do it. Why wouldn't we want to give them the option to run really low life cycle natural gas instead of coal? So I propose that's kind of the direction that would be a bit of a high road way to get there.
I'll add on to that. I think one thing that all Canadians kind of recognize is, as has been said, the purchasing power, but specifically the purchasing power of the Canadian dollar. And I think one thing that has been underappreciated, both in the kind of the political, especially in the political discourse, but I don't think a lot of people put two and two together, is I think for a lot of people it made sense when the Canadian dollar as a petrocurrency fell off a cliff in 2014 alongside oil, right? But I think a lot of people are very confused why now basically, the Canadian dollar capped out around 80 cents to the US dollar, despite oil heading up to its highest point since the 2008 financial crisis. And the answer is, even though a large portion, we are getting benefit from our trade account, right? Our resources are worth more money, so our trade balance is improved. Sure, that provides a little bit, at least, of downside protection to the trade balance. Sorry, to the exchange rate. But the single biggest kind of driver of that previous relationship between oil and the Canadian dollar wasn't trade, it was investment. It was massive inflows, hundreds of billions of dollars of inflows of foreign currency that inflated the Canadian dollar and essentially gave Canadians a security blanket. Back in 2012 to 2014, sure, oil prices were high, but the Canadian dollar was at or above par. So now you're actually seeing the negative on the other side for consumers. Oil prices are back up to those levels, even higher than 2012 to 2014. But now we have a 20% penalty on top of that, in that we're needing to pay the currency difference. So I think one thing around, we always talk about jobs, and I think jobs are important. And I think people talk about, and CAP has done great work on kind of tracing the lineage of activity in, Western Canada, in particular in the energy sector, to jobs in support services and manufacturing in Ontario. I think that's a very, very valuable kind of exercise. But I think also more focus on the currency point, because now people are starting to travel again, right? And I think, we look at, plane tickets. Well, plane tickets are really expensive, first of all, because airfare and fuel is really expensive. But also, once upon a time, we would have had a huge uplift of our purchasing power from this resource boom, and we're not seeing really any of it anymore. So I think that's, basically say, investment in and a strong Canadian resource market means a stronger dollar in your pocket. And I think these are the types of personal hooks we need to find, because I completely agree that, people are willing to pay for a premium product, for instance, but I don't choose the natural gas that goes into my house. And I think this is part of the challenge, is that we don't have that kind of consumer choice flexibility to say, I want to choose Tourmaline gas instead of, Qatari gas. Thankfully, you don't have to deal with that in Canada. But I think my point still stands of, at some point at a national import level, maybe, but a consumer level, really, really challenging. So I think this question of how do we find these hooks that will kind of get consumers and voters in particular interested in kind of a stronger Canadian resource economy for them specifically. It needs to be selfish, I think, to a degree. And I think finding that hook, I think, is really, really important.
One of the hooks that I see is consuming more Canadian things. And so for every dollar that we consume in Canada that we produced in Canada is far better than if we had to import it and pay someone outside of Canada for what we used. Opposite, if we export, somebody's going to give us a dollar for what we export. And this is where energy works in very well, because it's a strong export opportunity. And this is where our manufactured goods that we can consume in Canada better, it works out well. And if we can eliminate the energy that we import, then we are feeding our own economy rather than feeding the economy of some other country. So I see if we can find a story that is simple for people to understand why made in Canada is good, exporting from Canada is good, I think we will all benefit.
I think we have to demonstrate better our responsible way of doing things and make it more visible to Canadians. For example, in Sault Ste. Marie, we proposed to build a ferrochrome production facility. It's still in our plans. That plant, as the way we have it designed, would have 1/10 of the greenhouse gas impact as buying the average pound of chrome today, because you're either buying it from South Africa, China, or Kazakhstan. 1/10. And we struggle to get Canadians to see how that valuable that is in the future world where ESG performance is going to be super critical. So can we galvanize Canadians around that we can renew our resource sector because around responsible production and hammer it hard? We're not effective at the collective level, not effective at the Canadian company champion level. We've got to get Canadians to see that we have a glorious opportunity to be the most responsible producer of these products, and get Canadians to see that there is no world where they're not required. And they are required. The demand will go up. Just the demand that's going to exist by the world going from 7 to 10 billion people is going to have enormous demand, let alone have the transition to the green economy. So we got a glorious opportunity to lead on how that can be done, but we're not very good at getting it across.
Sorry, please.
I would propose a really good way to do that is to start from the beginning. I would propose in the energy transition and environmental, everyone wants to jump to the target at the end and kind of get all worried and confused. But I would propose the best start is to start at the beginning. Like, let's look at where we are today and how we fit and be really proud of where we are today. And then tomorrow go try to blow it out of the water and do way better. So like, if we start from the beginning and say, this is how good we are, and this is how we compare on a world stage, and this is how we can keep getting better and better and better the whole way through, then we can actually have a narrative that's easy enough for people to understand, and people can understand the realities of the space we're in today and how we keep evolving over time. But if we keep focusing on 2050 and net zero, and that's the only thing we ever talk about, then we're going to have a heck of a time trying to get our head around what the right path is. But if we really focus on where are we today, how do we keep improving, how do we keep taking the next best step in that path to where we want to go, then I think we can get Canadians on our side to say, yeah, this is a really practical approach, and go look at around the world. No one's doing any better than us. So let's be proud of what we're doing, and then let's blow it out of the water and do better every single day.
At this moment, I'm going to try and do my personal plug for carbon capture, because I think one of the things here that's really interesting is kind of giving Canadians a path, giving them a logical path for how the narrative shifts. Because I think everyone knows that the oil sands have a lot going for them, but their one big challenge is that they are, on a relative basis, very emissions intensive. But I think people don't also understand some of the positive benefits of the structure and technical characteristics of the oil sands in particular. And I think two of them are very important here. One, there's essentially zero exploration risk. We know exactly where it all is, particularly in moments where we're going to be discussing peak demand and discussing ways to scale back on costs of, let's say, the international majors who are slashing exploration budgets. Well, the Canadian oil patch doesn't need to worry about it. We know where all the oil is. The other benefit here is that versus a lot of other production, let's say versus the Permian Basin in West Texas and New Mexico, Canadian, particularly oil sands production, is extraordinarily concentrated in large facilities. So what we would call single point emitters, which makes it actually very nice. It makes it a very nice fit with carbon capture and sequestration. So when we're discussing things like the Pathways Initiative and the Carbon Trunk Line, you can very easily imagine a scenario with the right application of political will, industry will, and money, of course, where the oil sands goes from one of the highest emitting jurisdictions for oil on the planet to being one of the absolute lowest. Because not only do you have that single point source, you have a massive pool of engineering talent in Western Canada and Alberta in particular, and you have a massive trove of depleted salt reservoirs where this can all be put. Now, the challenge with CCS has always been that it's never been tried at scale, and you never have built up a big industry around it. But I think that, again, it's a challenge, but it's another opportunity for Canada, because if Canada can actually get across the finish line and demonstrate that we can actually take the oil sands, the blighted kind of emissions oil sands, and turn them into some of the cleanest production assets on the planet, then Alberta not only has a massive oil sands industry, it also has a massive carbon capture, consulting and technology industry that becomes a major source of exports to the rest of the world. So I think it's making a very clear pathway for people, because I think like Scott was saying, we know where we are today. We kind of know where we want to go. It's really hard sometimes to picture how we get from A to B. I think making it crystal clear for people that it's going to take a lot. But it's very technically plausible. But the biggest thing, I can't remember who was saying it right now, I think it was Stephen, but this isn't something we need to do in a decade. And right now, the big debate in Canada is essentially who is going to pay for carbon capture, investment. And honestly, we actually can't afford that time of debate. That's actually the biggest cost here. We just need to put the stuff in the ground, start it going, and then honest to goodness, figure out who covers the tab later, because otherwise we're all going to pay the cost of that kind of laggard status.
If I could change the subject a little bit, although it's obviously all related, labor, right? Like part of when people talk about growth as an economic challenge, and we've got a labor environment where you can talk about good jobs and getting people jobs and how industry contributes to that and approving new projects contributes to that. There's a real natural story there. But when you've got a really tight labor environment, and actually industry, I think, struggles, though please correct me if I'm wrong, struggles a bit on the labor side with actually finding the talent you need in a tight labor market. What are those dynamics like? Is there a political upside to telling a story about employment, or is frankly the greater concern from industry finding the talent in the first place and getting the labor you need to produce what you need to be able to produce, given current assets. You know, in many cases, I know, Dave, you're negotiating, right? You're deeply involved in those labor discussions. So maybe if you want to kick it off, and then we can get into a conversation about the policy challenges around supplying the labor that's required if we have these great ambitions.
Yeah, I think certainly labor is a challenge, and we hear often it's very popular to say that it's skills that we lack, but no, we're a small 37 million person country. We need more people, and we need more people because it will create consumer demand. We need more people because they will work in all roles in our organizations. And so we in Sault Ste. Marie, for example, are trying to grow. And it is one of the constraints, but we contribute to local STEM activities in order to encourage young people to take up industrial careers. But I would say there's going to be no substitute for the need to attract more people to Canada. And so the more we as industry support increased levels of immigration, the more we support government processing quicker and refuse to accept long delays in the processing of immigration applications the way we have right now. We need new Canadians faster, quicker, and people want to come to Canada. And the more people come to Canada from countries where they understand how important it is to develop resources, how they understand that it's unacceptable to take long periods of time to approve projects, the better off we are going to be. And I think we have huge successes of blended communities where we have new Canadians, existing Canadians, young Canadians. We need all and more. And so as a manufacturer, this is what we're advocating for. And we know that our customers in the energy industry are doing the same. I think that the more we can make sure that people understand there's an opportunity, we have jobs here if we can have more people come to Canada.
And I propose, like, we need to really respect those people that put on a hard hat and coveralls every day and go and do work that's allowing Canadians to turn on a furnace or making the fertilizer that allows us to grow food, or working in a mine site. Like, we really need to appreciate their service, and like, it is not easy work. They're out there in the mud, they're away from their families, they're working very hard and very safely and in an environment that's quite difficult. We need to really thank those people for their service and lift them up. They are the part of Canada that makes us work. So I do take offense to some of the things, like the concept of a just transition for the oil sector type of thing, because it would propose that they're not providing a valuable service or that they're not doing incredible work today. And they are. They're doing the most incredible work today in our sector. They're out there working very hard to make it so that when the average Canadian turns on their furnace, it works, or that you can drive down the road, or that kids can go to school, or that we can actually grow the food that we need to survive. In my mind, that worker is incredibly strong for Canada, and we need to be quite proud of them. Like, we should be thanking them for their service, not proposing that we should transition them to do something different. So yeah, I think that labor is really important. I propose in oil and gas, we kind of go through boom and bust over and over again. So we always have challenges with labor as a whole. But yeah, we've got to get that respect back to the people in the coveralls and work boots, and that's across all Canada, whether they're building a house or putting in a carpet or whatever. That we got to get that respect for hard work back again, because they're doing incredible things for Canadians.
It's a shameless plug for the petroleum service industry of Canada, the Petroleum Services Association of Canada, that I'm a vice chair of. Our tagline is working energy. And what we think that unites us as Canadians is that we work hard, we live in diverse communities. And so we like to think of those people that are working to bring Canadian resources to market are those that are in service, supply, and manufacturing sectors working across the country, whether it's in an isolated rig location or a northern community like Sault Ste. Marie in manufacturing. These are the working Canadians that you're talking about, Scott, and we need more of them. And you're right, we need to show how much we appreciate their contribution to the importance. And I think probably, Stephen, it's the same thing for you on the mining sector. Without these people, we won't be achieving the success as a country that we have the potential to achieve.
Yeah, for sure. In mining, it's a significant problem. And I think there's kind of three things that have to be done. One, the industry needs to reposition itself a little bit in terms of that jobs that are high-skilled jobs. Most Canadians think mining jobs are low skill. That's not the case, but we've not done enough to convince people of that. Second, I 100% agree that we need to get immigration. This country was built on particularly its primary industries on immigrants. So why can't we do it again? And third, I think we need to focus on our Indigenous population in this country is massively underemployed. So I think that's a natural source of workforce, particularly in the resource sector, where they are more than willing to work. We just have to figure out how to get past some of the social barriers, some of the education barriers that they have to work through. So, I think those three kind of vectors all need to be done if we're going to have a vibrant resource sector.
Jump on your last comment there, and to thank CAP for their sponsorship of this event. Canada's petroleum producers are the largest employer of Indigenous Canadians, and I think it's understood across the country of how important those jobs are in these more remote communities are to the Indigenous communities.
Maybe that's a good segue. On the Indigenous question, we talked about reconciliation at the beginning. We're talking about Indigenous people and jobs. I mean, there's also I think a view that the public has, or a debate certainly that happens in the public about the requirement for consultation, whether that amounts to a veto power or whether it doesn't, and the relationship between future projects, their ability to get approved, reducing the risk of that, and consulting with Indigenous peoples and First Nations across the country. And I know when I talk to people in industry, certainly the folks at CAP, I think that the public view of those things being opposed is a bit off base, particularly if you talk about specific First Nations where there's been just incredible success stories. And so maybe I'll tee you all up a bit, not to guess what you'll say, but I think it will be worth getting into that a little bit and maybe talking about how we could shift the public consciousness around that, particularly among Canadians who think they know about it, people who live in urban centers and are just further away geographically from projects and developments and places of production, and also where First Nations people live.
For those that live in Los Angeles who purport to know more than those do here.
Maybe because we're kind of living a lot of it right now. While the legislation or the trend isn't a veto technically, what it can become, if not managed right, an economic veto, because it extends the timeline or increases the difficulty level to such a degree that you can't get capital to do the work. So how do you get around that? Well, I think the only way and is, first of all, to recognize that Indigenous people are not a homogeneous group view-wise. And I think that's a flaw that I see in Canadian thinking. And we think that, the Indigenous populations all thinks the same way. Well, they don't, okay? First of all, then you have to say, I think we have to create the appropriate partnerships with them and move away from the concept of consulting, okay, and move to how do we work with them so that the consulting becomes irrelevant to a degree, because they're partners in the projects that we want to get done. And unless we move there, this is going to be a massive, difficult journey, because the resistant parts of our society, NGO groups that don't want resource development, are very good at partnering with the Indigenous people who don't want to see resource development happen. Then we are partnering with the Indigenous people who want to get something done. It's going to be a de facto veto, because we'll just won't be able to get it done on a timely basis. So I think we have to change our mindset drastically there in order to, and rely less on the legislation and more on the practicalities of how do you work with the people, with the willing people, the willing Indigenous people, and make that more visible than Indigenous people who have partnered with the groups who don't want to see it happen.
Yeah, I'd kind of jump in to kind of play off of what Dave mentioned before. Like we employ a large amount of Indigenous people, and they're part of our success. So I would propose that they're partners with us. They've got the service companies and the resources and the things that are part of us succeeding. And I think what's kind of happening is you're getting a very small percentage of people, whether it be a small percentage of people, non-Indigenous people, that are opposed to oil and gas, and then they're finding a very small percentage of Indigenous people as well that are opposed to oil and gas. So then you kind of end up in this narrative that may or may not be true. But I think it's a continuous thing that we need to continuously work with Indigenous people. We need to continuously work on ways to have them be part of the sector, have them be employed, have them have their own services, have their own companies, have a big piece of the sector. And they are today, and they'll continue to be so. And I think it's going to be a journey of continuous work. It's not something that's ever going to just go away. It's something that we'll work on every single day, and they'll be part of the solution.
But Scott, just at the government level, that is not visible.
Yeah.
The communities who don't want resource projects to happen and their NGO partners are very visible. And so, that's a massive problem.
And I think that's probably part of the problem. Like the Indigenous people that are working, that just want to go and work and be part of the solution, they don't necessarily have the biggest voice. They're focused on providing for their families and providing for their nation, and are focused on doing. It's kind of the ones that are, it's the small group of people that have a very extreme amount of voice in Canada that definitely have attention with the government as well. So I think that's kind of the thing. We got to keep communicating and lifting up all the people we are working with every day, and show what the majority of First Nations communities believe, and just continuously work with them to keep them being part of the sector and part of the solution. I don't think it's ever going to be an easy solution that ever comes to an easy end. It's just a continuous process of being part of the same solution, heading down the same path together. Oh, you're on mute there, Steve.
Yeah. So I think one thing we need to consider, and it's a couple of things we did, it's very important because we have a heavy reliance on our Indigenous partners' participation, making it more visible in management, making it more visible, like saying that are Indigenous. I think the number's probably a little disappointing. How many board members across major Canadian corporations are Indigenous? Probably a very small number. I think we have to get more visibility in arenas like that. I think we need to get, how do you get a stronger voice of companies with working with Indigenous communities that create visibility at the government level? I think all these things need to happen. How do you support? One of the things we did is working with the province of Ontario is on the regional road development. We work to make our Indigenous partners the proponents for that infrastructure. So that, you know, the visibility that comes with that, I think is very significant. So getting the visibility that they can participate and lead elements of this journey and economy, I think is a critical piece of work. It is, and it's very important at the government level. And I think we don't push it hard enough.
Thanks. So we only have 15 minutes left. Just a reminder to anyone participating and watching, if you've got any questions, you can throw them in the chat. We still got a few minutes left that we can get into them. Maybe what I'll ask next is, and I'll start with you, Rory, as a watcher of commodities, I'm sure you're asked to prognosticate frequently. Though prognostication, I mean, I was looking at the Bank of Canada's forecasts and how they have fallen short and just been way off month over month this past while. So prognostication in and of itself is maybe a fool's errand. But my question really is, what do we think is next? Like, where do we go from here? We talked a bit about opportunity, but maybe both. What do you think is going to happen, and you know, being a bit realistic about where you see things going? Could you give us a sense of that, and then also how can we influence that, and how should we be trying to influence that on the political, public policy, and geopolitical trends front? I know it's a big question, but let's just try to look forward a bit and have a conversation about where we see things going.
All right, so I'll just take 3 hours to answer that. Yeah, so I mean, I've had my job's been forecasting the price of oil and copper and steel and stuff for the better part of a decade now. There's never been a harder forecasting environment. The volatility is tremendous. We're entirely in the realm of scenario analysis. So are we going into a global recession? Dare I say depression? Are we going to where are we going in the near term? It's, no one can really know. But I think the question is, knowing that level of uncertainty, what can we say about the future? I think part of the challenge is that uncertainty also, more than any even lower oil price or commodity price or whatever, volatility is the enemy of investment, because people want there to be a sense of normalcy. People want to know not just what, the price is or what the strip is, they want to know where it's going to be over the next decade. Most of these projects have extraordinarily long shelf lives. They take decades, years, if not decades, to pay off. So I think the question is, what is it going to look like now and in the near term? It's, we're going to increasingly have a lackluster supply response, I think, for all the reasons the panelists have discussed, not just in oil and gas, but in minerals and everything else. But then we're also going to have all of this very, very volatile economic scenario that makes everything seem, okay, maybe not so bad. Like I was saying earlier, oil is down $20. Is it fixed? Copper is down below $4 a ton for the first time since early 2021. Is copper fixed? No, but the price is saying it is, or at least like we're getting better. So there's this challenge of copper is one of my favorite to talk about, because it's the commodity or the metal that has the undeniably, like unambiguously most bullish long-term supply demand kind of balance. It's involved in everything electrification. We're going to need oodles more of it for basically everything we're going to do. But in the near term, like today, copper prices are collapsing because of the industrial cycle and specifically real estate in China. So this is this big challenge is, I remember, giving bullish, copper presentations, 7 years ago, and the prices collapsed. And all the miners that I was talking to were like, what gives? I'm like, oh, well, China pulled back on monetary policy and the real estate market collapsed. And well, that's the pudding. That's not very satisfying for an investment committee that's going to need to put $10, $20 billion in the ground and then operate it for 30, 40 years. So I think the question is, again, I think it comes back down to we are the energy transition, particularly given the fact that we haven't prepped for it especially prudently, is going to be extraordinarily volatile. So it's going to be a question of, again, how can government contribute and work with the expertise of the private sector to figure out how to smooth out some of that volatility? Because government has a bunch of tools at its disposal, obviously a very large budget. It also has a very different risk profile than does private companies that have investors to deal with. So I think it's, again, how do you leverage the expertise of the private sector while shifting more and more of the risk? Because again, some of these projects might not work, but I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't build them. Because I think we're going to need to build an overcapacity of essentially everything in order to guarantee that we're not going to have debilitating periods of volatility like we do today. So I think it's the question of how, once upon a time, the big buzzword was stranded assets. Oh, we can't invest in this pipeline because, maybe it's going to work for 20 years, but it's got a shelf life of 40, and there's no way a pipeline is going to be operating for 40 years. Okay, well, then we write it off, but we're going to need it for 20. So I think there's this question of how do we get the investment in the ground? And again, the government, unfortunately, for better or worse, is the only player that is going to be able to make those types of investments with that kind of broader spectrum of considerations beyond just, asset level IRR, frankly.
Thanks. Steve, maybe I'll go to you next. I haven't mentioned the Ring of Fire yet, but now is maybe the moment. Given the Premier and the current government in Ontario with a fresh new majority mandate and their seeming excitement and interest in finally developing the Ring of Fire, and all the other global and domestic trends we've talked about, are you optimistic about the future of mining in Ontario and Canada? Where do you see things going?
I think there's a couple answers there. First of all, absolute undeniable support from Premier Ford and his team in the renewed Conservative government. Absolutely undeniable. I think the other side of that is absolute undeniable support from both opposition parties, okay, during the election. So I don't think you ever heard once someone didn't want it. There's a little bit about somebody wants it more responsible, a little bit on that thing. So the issue is, can we get it through, and not the infrastructure, through the permitting process? The permitting process for the infrastructure started in 2017. It's now 2022, and we're maybe half done. Okay, so that's the challenge. Okay, and get focus and getting it complete. Okay, is the challenge. The mines are going to have similar challenges. So if a project that has a life of, let's say, 20 years takes 10 years to permit, that's not a terribly attractive business. So we must. So while do we want to develop the Ring of Fire? Absolutely. Does the province want to develop the Ring of Fire? Absolutely. The issue becomes, can we navigate and make and demonstrate our responsible approach in a more timely manner? So that remains the big challenge. So if we can rise to that challenge, I think we've created another natural resources district that will, rival some of the long-standing natural resource districts that we already have in Canada, like Sudbury, like the sands in Alberta. It's a multi-decade long, if not multi-century long, producing district. So long-winded, but great support. Want to do it? Can we get the Canadians on board with getting it permitted in a timely way?
Scott, what about you? Are you bullish on oil and gas development in the coming years? Given the opportunity, do you think Canada can take advantage of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think through COVID, we kind of had a couple of years of not building all the things that we used to build, and that's not something that we're going to go and just instantly be able to replenish those supplies of 2 years of things that we weren't building or weren't doing. The world doesn't have the manpower to do that. So I think it's going to take many years or multiple years of time in order to do that. And then there's many years of increased energy demand to build those things and to do those things. On top of it, you have economies around the world that you've got essentially third world countries becoming first and drastically increasing their energy demand. So energy is something we need more of, not less of, and we need to keep doing it better, but we definitely need more of it. So definitely bullish on that front. I think what's most kind of concerning is whether we can build real projects at real rates to get exports to a global market. I kind of was at a clean energy ministerial and seeing the contrast between the way the US kind of looked at LNG terminals versus the way that Canada did. in Canada, we kind of looked at this like 20-year approval process, and did everyone get their say, and did everything work? Where in the US, they kind of said, well, these are good for everybody. It's cleaner, it's better. They're $50 billion worth of projects going into areas that were just devastated. They kind of thought of it as throw a parade in the street if there's a company that wants to build an LNG facility and approve it in 2 weeks, because they don't see a downside, and I can't personally see a downside myself either. So I'm extremely bullish on energy. I'm extremely bullish on natural gas. You see really good natural gas prices. You see world demand that's huge. But I really hope that Canada can take advantage of all the assets that we're blessed with, get them helping a world problem, and really kind of change our mindset on big projects that mean big things for Canada, whether they be mines or LNG or pipelines or what have you. I think we really need to think a little bit differently than we have been.
Well, I want to respect the 1 p.m. sharp endpoint. So Dave, I'll give the final word to you, and we can wrap it after that.
Sure. I think from Tenaris's perspective, we're optimistic for the future. As much as I said, 50% of the world's energy is coming from not free countries, 50% is coming from free countries. And there has been an evolution of supply chains and where countries that think the same, act the same, have the same structure are working together more. And I think, so from that standpoint, Canada has an important role to play as a leader among those countries. And so when we interact with government, whether it's local, provincial, or federal, they're actually really open to solutions. And so how can we create a solution to a problem? You see it in the steel industry and manufacturing industry, where there have been some pretty large investments, larger even than the Tenaris investments, that have all three levels of government support with them. These are investments that add manufacturing capabilities and reduce emissions. So I think if we can take that approach and communicate more with government and our communities, I think we have the chance to solve problems. And so we're optimistic that there is a great opportunity in the resource sector and those that serve it.
Thanks. Rory, do you want to close things off?
Well, I just really want to thank each of you for just an excellent conversation, and also to reassure you that, you know, the story that is being told here is being told to our network in Ontario and the Chamber network across Canada. And, you know, I think this just adds great proof of case, if you like, for the role that natural resources can play in Canada in economic reconciliation, driving leadership, but also stakeholder collaborations between the private, public, and our Indigenous communities. And that truly will lead Canada into a prosperous future. So thank you, each of you, for your contributions today. And certainly we're open to any further conversations that you wish to have with us here in not only Sault Ste. Marie, but our network across Canada. Ginny, thank you so much for moderating today's session, and thank you very much to CAP for their support in allowing us to bring our own resources here at the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce forward to demonstrate that we too are resource champions in the small town of Ontario, and we're looking forward to Stephen's future investment as we open up the Ring of Fire, and certainly any of those folks that are represented here who wish the support of the Chambers of Commerce. That is what we do. And we greatly appreciate your support of our organizations as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy your day. And again, thank you.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Bye-bye.